Most of the published research out there, even experiments that are stated to be done according to the scientific method, have results that can't be replicated, that are false. Observational data like epidemiology is worthless when it comes to cause and effect relationships. If you look at all of the literature, and you can start with a textbook, you can go to the American Heart Association or other shill agencies like that, you can go to review articles, and for almost all the modern diseases that are prevalent in the community and the leading causes of death, they really have almost no information about what's the actual cause. The first heart attack ever in the United States wasn't reported until 1912. I was looking in the animal kingdom, is there spontaneous atherosclerotic disease? And interestingly, what I found is only in herbivorous animals do they find this. Statins are one of the top 10 grossing drugs.
Yep, billions of dollars a year, I'm told. So we have atherosclerosis, which develop only on one side of the vascular tree and not the other side, only on the high pressure side, only in the arterial side. You don't get atherosclerosis developing in veins. Atherosclerotic plaques occur in very distinct regions within the arterial side of the circuit only, and those areas are the areas where turbulent flow occurs in the blood. Seed oils have no place in the human diet whatsoever. I think the best thing a person can do in terms of reducing their likelihood of heart disease is to stop eating carbohydrates. Right, thanks for joining us once again, where today I am very, very pleased to introduce my very, very special guest, who probably needs not very much of an introduction, but we'll do it anyway. Dr. Andy Kaufman is with us. Andy is a self-proclaimed recovering physician who broke all the rules to leave a privileged career in mainstream medicine. Dr. Andy became more and more skeptical of the allopathic paradigm, so you're very welcome here, until he finally blew germ theory wide open and became that thing that starts with C, whistleblower. Good. Since then, Dr. Andy has been speaking and teaching the truth about medicine, viruses, natural healing, and other important subjects such as economics, law, education, and science. Today we're going to talk heart disease, but we'll get to that in a minute. Dr. Andy received his Bachelor's of Science in Biology at MIT and his MD from the University of South Carolina and his psychiatric residency at Duke. Dr. Andy has served on medical school facility, has been a leader in academics and professional organizations, and has conducted and published original research. He patented a medical device and ran a startup company. He testified as an expert witness in local, state, and federal court. So there you go. Impressive stuff. Just so it's all fair and just, I better give you my background, Andy, in case you're not aware of it. 20 or so years in academia with 3 different specializations over that time. First of all, in the physiology of rest and exercise. Then I spent some time in human nutrition. Then I went to cardiovascular pathophys after that. And then after that, I went, sod it, I'm not playing this game anymore. You can all... And I'm going to go and be a YouTube influencer instead. So, for the last few years, I've been doing that. Anyway, welcome, Andy. Welcome to the show. Heart disease.
Thank you so much, Bart. It seems like we have some parallels in our professional history, and it's not in my bio, but I also did spend a couple of years working in the biotech industry, so I know how drug development and pharmaceutical manufacturing works, or the basics of it.
Do you like my mug, by the way, my coffee mug? This is a patented one. You can get this. If you like, you can have one yourself. Just go to my channel and there's links there to the merchandise. And you can get right-handed as well.
Is that the sponsor of today's interview?
If you like. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So look, what started the communication between yourself and myself, Andy, is that you posted a comment under one of my videos. It was the one about heart disease solved, which I know is a clickbaity title. Of course it is. But I genuinely think that I probably have the answer for most people in terms of the heart disease scourge. And you made an interesting comment around, interesting video. You said, but. So I thought, well, why not invite you on the show and you can tell us, what it is that is important to understand about heart disease. And I'll throw some challenges and questions at you perhaps. And then we'll all get the benefit of that.
Well, that sounds fantastic, Bart. And let me tell you that I recently did interview with a couple of the carnivore doctors, including Dr. Saladino, who I know that you get along with and agree on everything with.
Absolutely.
But also Dr. Ken Berry.
Yep.
And some people made comments there that, oh, you should get Bart on because he really knows the science well. And I started looking at your material, and I really appreciate how you point out that, observational data like epidemiology is worthless when it comes to cause and effect relationships. And really it's for hypothesis generation and not much more. And that, you're very rigorous, especially about the science with respect to metabolism and related health issues. And, I try to observe the same principles, understanding the scientific method, and, knowing that most of the published research out there, even experiments that are at least stated to be done according to the scientific method, right, have results that can't be replicated, that are false. We see even people like Professor Ioannidis commenting on that. Even the drug industry is complaining that the basic science research is so flawed that they can't even use it to make money anymore, right? So the work that we're doing here, adding skepticism to these issues, is really important. And if you look at all of the literature, and you can start with a textbook, you can go to the American Heart Association or other shill agencies like that, you can go to review articles, primary literature sources, and for almost all the modern diseases that are prevalent in the community and the leading causes of death, they really have almost no information about what's the actual cause of these illnesses. And you know that the pharmaceutical treatments and other related allopathic treatments never really address the root cause or underlying cause because they don't even know what it is. And it seems to be similar with cardiovascular disease, and maybe we can kind of specifically talk about heart attacks because we maybe want to exclude the heart disease that's popped up in young people the last couple of years that may have a controversial cause. But certainly, we've seen the first heart attack ever in the United States wasn't reported until 1912, and before that, even all throughout the medical literature in Europe and such, there were very few case reports of heart attacks. It was practically an unknown disease. So there's something about our modern life that has brought on the heart attacks. And if you look in the textbooks and the papers, all you see are risk factors, right? Or things like inflammation, but not, well, what's the cause? Why is there inflammation? Or, diabetes. Okay, well, then why do they have diabetes? Of course, diabetes can't really be the cause because many people without diabetes have heart attacks. And even atherosclerosis, I think there's some big questions because of a couple things. One, the finding that plaque rupture is the precipitating event for infarctions, and that tends to happen in small lesions rather than large plaques. Large plaques are what is said to cause angina. But then we also have animals, like you're probably aware of this, but I was looking in the animal kingdom, is there spontaneous atherosclerotic disease? And interestingly, what I found is only in herbivorous animals do they find this, but there are no heart attacks in animals. So why, if they have arteriosclerosis, why don't they have heart attacks? Are these two things really related, or are they distinct and there's something unique about humans, or maybe the animals just don't live long enough to get heart attacks? And I don't know the answer to those questions, but it definitely gives us some preliminary deductive information about what might be causing it in humans.
Right, yeah. So we've got the instability of plaques, and you've got the rupture of that unstable, usually smaller atherosclerotic lesion, absolutely. And then you've got a thrombus which circulates for X period of time before lodging somewhere and causing an infarct, which, if that's in the myocardium, okay, now you've got an MI. If it's in the brain, you've got a stroke. Those kind of things. You can get embolisms in the pulmonary circuit as well. Sure. That can occur.
And you can have it in the extremities too, get an
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. At the end of the day, the primary stuff for me, the stuff that I'm always throwing challenges out to folks, are obviously around these folks that will stand up and bang the lipidology Bible, that bit of canon, and say the cause of atherosclerosis is LDL-C, blah, 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 which they'll point to epidemiological so-called prospective cohort studies and or Mendelian randomization, neither of which is capable of informing on cause nor effect, even though they will claim that Mendelian can, which absolutely it cannot. And it also seems to me that they are all completely ignoring the clear presentation histologically of atherosclerotic lesioning, its patterning, its placement, how it develops, where it develops, and what the makeup of those plaques are in terms of the histology of that tissue. And to me, those are the very, very important points that would seem to absolutely dismiss any notion that any of the lipoproteins play any causal role whatsoever. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I completely agree, and I've known about this for quite a long time. And so, I saw the graph that you commonly put up, right? I think it's 164 countries. It comes from the British Heart Association or something like that. And there's a very similar data for LDL-C, also from the NHANES survey in the United States, which has, not as many respondents, but quite a number, but it shows the same exact pattern. In fact, when you get below 99, they divided it into groups categorically, but the 70 to 99 group was the only, that and the below 70 are the only two groups that had elevated all-cause mortality. The higher LDL levels, which is what we're told is, going to kill you, they had the same exact mortality, basically one, as, the median value. And it's that J-shaped curve or inverted J exactly, like you showed. Now, this is epidemiologic data, but still, obviously, we can use it to rule out certain things, right? If we see that the associative relationship is the opposite of what we would expect for a causal relationship, we can negate that as a cause, although if it was correlated positively, it could still be a cofactor and we couldn't confirm it as a cause. So I think, I completely agree with you. And also just common sense wise, obviously cholesterol is required for every cell in our body, right? And it's the substrate for many biomolecules that are vital to survival. So how could it also be the cause of our demise at the same time? It seems like that is outside of nature's wisdom.
Exactly. The analogy, the analogy that I'm always throwing around is the one about, well, every single time you turn on the television and there's a major forest fire somewhere, you will see fire crews running around doing fire crew stuff. Every single time, won't you? Ergo,
that's the same analogy that's frequently used about bacteria in germ theory as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But you're right. It shows, obviously, the firefighters don't go around starting the fires.
So, what we've got is a situation where the LDL, which delivers the cholesterol to the damaged tissue, and the cholesterol thus delivered to said damaged tissue, that's happening for a reason. 50% by weight and by volume, as it turns out, of every membrane of every of the several trillion cells in your body is cholesterol. So if those cells are damaged in some way, then of course the body is going to want to deliver cholesterol there to repair that damage. And if you've got damaged tissue, then you've got the proteoglycans that would, attract that occurring.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say there also may be some of the cholesterol that made up the cells that are damaged may collect and be, taken up by the macrophages, the so-called foam cells as well.
And then, of course, you need oxidation. The native lipoprotein is not going to cause a reaction in the immune system because it's your own native lipoprotein. So at the end of the day, what we get from these imbeciles, let's be honest, that support this lipid theology, they'll say, oh, yes, well, turns out that LDL is necessary for heart disease, but not sufficient. Well, hang on a minute. You just said cause and effect previously, didn't you? You said this causes heart disease. If it's not sufficient to cause heart disease, then it's not the cause of heart disease. That would make pretty basic logic sense to me, but then I'm a divergent thinker perhaps, and perhaps so are you to some degree, Andy. I don't know. You tell us. Am I off?
Well, look, this is, it violates a basic principle of science, which is falsifiability. So if you have a hypothesis and you test it and the results don't support it, then, you need to throw out that hypothesis or modify it substantially and then come up with another experiment to test it. But what happens is that scientists in the modern era seem to have such fervent beliefs in their hypothesis that no matter what the data shows, they're going to stick with that hypothesis, but they'll make slight modifications to explain the anomalous data and then stick with it. And they seem to do this quite persistently. And, I can think of several examples, some of which might be too controversial for YouTube, but I definitely see this pattern. And I think that's what's going on here. So, first it's cholesterol, then it's, well, yes, cholesterol, but paired with some other X factor, right? And then when that X factor doesn't pan out, then they'll have yet another way to still blame cholesterol.
Reverse causality, though.
It's what?
Reverse causality, though. When you find that a large population of people who have had an MI in the last 24 hours and they have their cholesterol tested, there's a study, there was N equals 134,000 or so in various different hospitals. I think it's all stateside. And obviously the first thing they'll do when you present with an MI is they'll take your cholesterol reading. So we've got this data. Okay, what are the cholesterol levels of people who have had an MI in the last 24 hours? And do we have
I think
this?
it's only a small portion who have any elevated cholesterol.
What would you expect? Okay, if you had 134,000 people who have had a heart attack, definitely, wouldn't you find that most of the people who have had a heart attack would be in a bin of people with a high level of LDL, because that's the cause, we're told, and there'd be fewer and fewer and fewer of those people at lower and lower levels. It would be a straight line.
If I were to answer that question based on what I was taught in my medical training, I would say 99.9% would have sky high lipoprotein and possibly total cholesterol levels.
Guess what they found?
I know that's not what the data showed. So
the data showed a normal distribution curve, a bell-shaped curve. So that eliminates dose response, cause and effect, LDLC, and heart attacks right there. But then they turn around and say, oh, no, it's reverse causality. The heart attack caused them to have lowered levels or some other. Oh, okay. So we're looking at this inverted J-shaped or upside down N-shaped curve where you've got a nadir of the lowest incidence of heart disease at X cholesterol level. And then you've got more above that level and more below that level. So this is the ideal, apparently, and you've got a bell-shaped curve of all of that, and they say, "Oh well, no, it's if cholesterol's high, then this is valid then, and it's the cause of the increase above the nadir. But if it's below that and heart disease still, then it's reverse causality." Good.
Yeah, that's just what I was saying, right? Invent a way to explain the anomalous findings, but stick to the primary hypothesis.
Exactly, and the thing that they're actually supporting is that.
Well, statins are one of the top 10 grossing drugs, aren't they?
Yep. Billions of dollars a year, I'm told. But it's still that even though that drug is now well off patent, there are still billions and billions of dollars a year being spent on statin medications, which, by the way, are associated with an exact increase in measured lifespans in statin populations versus their so-called match controls of not one single day. So even if these things were safe and effective and safe, the indication for that drug is none. Well, we know they're neither safe nor effective. So the fact that statins are still prescribed, to me, is criminal.
I'm astonished that we even have any all-cause mortality data, because usually those kind of studies are simply not done because they don't want to reveal the weakness of using these pharmaceuticals in the long term.
Exactly. And then you look at a statement by the European Consensus Panel on Atherosclerosis, wherein they state absolutely that the cause of atherosclerosis is absolutely LDL-C, no question. And then you look at the conflict of interest statement in that paper, which I have put up on various videos on my channel multiple times because it's so wildly amusing. Just stunning. All right, let's go to this. This is my favorite challenge that I throw out to folks that want to talk about cholesterol and or any of the lipoproteins and or any fraction of any of the lipoproteins, whatever, as being the cause. Here it is. When you look at the total area of the endothelium of the vascular tree, all of it, do we find atherosclerotic lesioning developing evenly across the surface of that endothelium?
Yeah, no, it's only in very discrete areas.
So is the blood coursing past the rest of the vascular tree in some way different to those particular areas that are developing the lesioning? I.e., does that blood contain a different amount of LDL-C or whatever else?
Well, I mean, I think really the only thing we could say might be different is the level of oxygen. I don't think we can say that the lipid, either lipoproteins or, I mean, on the surface of red blood cells, right, there's a lot of cholesterol being free cholesterol, but it doesn't offload in the arterial system before it gets to the venous system. It's the same in both.
That's right.
Throughout. And
So we have atherosclerosis, which develop only on one side of the vascular tree and not the other side, only on the high pressure side. Only in the arterial side. You don't get atherosclerosis developing in veins. Doesn't happen. That's interesting, isn't it?
You don't get varicose arteries either, right?
Correct. Isn't that interesting? Okay, there are some structural differences between arteries and veins in terms of, the intimate.
Well, you have more smooth muscle, right?
Exactly, yeah. However, you take a vein, let's say from the leg, and you graft it into a person's heart for a bypass. Hey presto, that vein, which was clean because it was a vein that was put in there, several months later you can go back, whoops, there's atherosclerosis developing in there now.
Now, do you know, because you may have seen, biopsy images of these venous grafts after they were already diseased, did they change their structure to did they essentially become phenotypic arteries, or did they stay, with a thinner wall in the typical venous structure?
Well, I mean, to clarify, I have seen not just diagrams, images, whatever else. I have stood in theatres and I have been involved in the process of these cases, these interventions being undertaken surgically. I have myself looked at the vein. That's interesting. Yes, good. And I have been in there when it's been grafted into a person's heart, and I have also been in that same hospital in a different theatre perhaps with that same patient 2 or 3 months later when they've had another event that needs grafting. I thought, well, let's have a look at the one we did a few months ago. Oh, look at that. It's not looking like in several months that there's any huge change to the structure of that grafted vein. I imagine over time it absolutely would, because it would be subject to pulsatile pressure that it wasn't on the venous when it was doing the venous thing.
Right. So you mean just from the mechanical forces, it'll cause muscular hypertrophy and
exactly, yes.
Intima.
Exactly, yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, like 2 or 3 months later, no, not so much, not visibly, not just by standing over the patient and going,
It would be a longer time scale for that to occur if it does.
Yes.
But also, is that 3 months long enough to develop plaque lesions in the
That's what I'm saying, yeah. When you do a scan of that grafted piece of vein that's now functioning as an artery in the heart, we can go, yeah, look, it's developing. You can see it with ultrasound. Really? Yeah.
So what do you think is going on to cause that?
Well, given that we are, by that kind of logic, we are kind of eliminating things, aren't we? And we're saying, okay, if we're looking at cause and effect here, all right, if LDL was the cause, then we would get probably even development of atherosclerotic lesioning across the entire inner surface of the endothelial cells in the vascular tree on both the high and low pressure side. Because if the cause is LDL and the blood carries LDL, the same LDL, on both sides of that tree, then that's what you'd get. Okay, we do not see that. It does not occur in veins in the low pressure side of the vasculature. It only occurs on the high pressure side. Ergo, logically, the pressure, the pulsatility of the arterial side, that must be involved causally. That's the thing that's absent on the other side.
You think it's like mechanical stresses, turbulence, things like that?
Specifically, that's the next point. Then you start eliminating, okay, is it the pressure itself? Well, no, because then you would, if it was the pressure was the cause, the immediate cause, what you would find is that atherosclerotic lesions would develop more so where the pressure is highest and less where the pressure is lowest. Okay, we actually do see that a bit because atherosclerosis is in the large arteries, not the small ones, generally.
I mean, there should be somewhat of a linear, or maybe not linear, but correlative relationship, right, between the pressures and at least a volume of plaques. I'm not sure what parameter you would use to...
We don't see that, and that's not reported in the literature at all. What is reported and what is seen by clinicians looking at these things in both living and folks who are no longer living, because I've done both of those in my career as well, atherosclerotic plaques occur in very discrete, very distinct regions within the arterial side of the circuit only, and those areas are the areas where turbulent flow occurs in the blood.
So like junctions of arterial branches,
right, so
things
you've
like
got
that.
Y junctions, you get atherosclerosis there and there. In, say, the aortic arch, what you're going to find is that the atherosclerotic lesioning is on the underside of the arch, not the upper side, where the turbulent flow occurs. According to the laws of fluid dynamics, looks like
you should be
turbulence
able to have some kind of measurement of this turbulence, at least with a catheter, right?
I think that could be done, and I'm not aware of it having been done.
Maybe with a Doppler ultrasound, you might be able to pick up something.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just wondering, because you could kind of, if you were able to quantify the turbulence in some way, you could compare people with no cardiac disease to cardiac disease and see if you see differences there.
Yeah.
But it could also be that the turbulence, may cause some micro trauma, but then there may be some other element that interacts with that in some way.
Absolutely. And I think it is. I think that the turbulent flow causes irritation and possibly physical damage to those particular endothelial cells in those patches where that turbulence is occurring. That would cause the expression of and the migration of the proteoglycans involved to those patches of tissue. That attracts the LDL-C packages to provide the cholesterol for the repair, in my mind. That's why that's happening. But also, glycation, oxidation would be involved. I think it's like fire, where you need heat, a fuel source, and oxygen. Remove any one, and you can't have a fire. Ask any fire.
Well, no, this really makes sense, right? Why the specific anatomical location of these lesions, right? But then, like you're saying, what's required to establish an actual lesion? Because obviously some people get them, other people don't. We all have some degree of turbulence. And I think oxidation is a key, because in everything I was able to, read from the mainstream, if they went down as far as possible to the root, they always ended with, oxidation. Of course, we know about lipid peroxidation, right? So even some of the native lipids in those lesions are going to be oxidated, but they are not the source of that oxidative potential. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, to my way of thinking as a former cardiovascular pathophysiologist, as someone who's looked into this quite a bit, it seems that while there are individual differences, and you've pointed to that quite correctly, that an average person, all else being equal, the difference between the average person and another average person in terms of turbulence and atherosclerosis would seem to be the most common thing would be blood pressure, chronic hypertension. Because you raise the blood pressure, you necessarily raise the degree of turbulence in those areas that are prone to turbulence if you raise the pressure above where it ought to be.
Well, that certainly makes sense, but then how would that lead to oxidative damage?
Well, the turbulence causes the irritation / physical damage to those endothelial cells in those patches where the turbulence is occurring. The blood inherently contains quite a bit of oxygen, so the oxygen is delivered up that way. LDL can be retained in that tissue by the proteoglycans that do that, thus exposing it to that oxidative derangement. What the hell, let's throw in some glycation, because the people that have elevated blood pressure chronically are probably the sort of people who eat a bunch of carbohydrates, because what that generally leads to is chronically elevated insulin in the blood, hyperinsulinemia, and that causes an inability to excrete sodium effectively, and that leads to increased blood. That's what the medical profession call that idiopathic hypertension. It's not idiopathic. There's your explanation. It's insulin because you're eating carbs. That's how I close the circle. What do you think?
So you think that the excess carbohydrate intake is actually the predominant causal factor of hypertension, or you think it could
I think
to result in the oxidative damage?
Well, yeah.
I mean, certainly we know that excess sugar in the body, right, can increase oxidation.
Yes.
And that could be related to the Randle cycle if it's overwhelmed. And also, obviously, if we have seed oils, we have oxalams.
Yeah. Look, I think seed oils are the devil. Seed oils have no place in the human diet whatsoever. I think they are by far the worst thing we've ever done in human nutrition fields. So absolutely, I'm not exonerating seed oils, polyunsaturated, plant-based things, that kind of stuff. But I think still that for the most part, most people with hypertension, you will find an association with a large intake of carbohydrate in most of those people. Now, that's not an etiological pathway that will fit every patient. There will be outliers where people that say, well, look, I'm not overweight. I don't eat carbohydrates, etc., etc., and here I am with a heart attack. I'm not suggesting that this is a one-size-fits-all, this is the answer for everybody solution, but I think it's the best one. I think the best thing a person can do in terms of reducing their likelihood of heart disease is to stop eating carbohydrates.
Well, I certainly have seen the health benefits of low carbohydrate diets, so I'm completely in agreement with you there. I think I look at hypertension a little bit differently, considering that, the reason for it is hypoperfusion of the vital organs, and the body's compensating for some way. Now, what caused the derangement leading to that hypoperfusion in the first place? What you were saying about the sodium regulation in the body is quite interesting. I'm not familiar with that data, but I certainly want to learn more about it. But I have found, in my natural healing work that fairly frequently, just by increasing someone's hydration level, they can get a reduction in their hypertension back down to much better levels. And, sometimes you can sort of tell that they're dehydrated by a narrow pulse pressure. And there's a way to estimate that from anesthesiology as a measure, a proxy of intravascular volume. And then occasionally actually from hypernatremia, because you can have a low-grade hypernatremia with chronic dehydration. There's other causes of it, obviously, as well. Yeah. So, I wonder, because the other thing about MIs is that most frequently they occur in the wee hours of the morning, which also is the time of day that we're the most dehydrated, because we keep making urine in our sleep, but don't take in any further liquids. So, I think there may be a contributory role there, similar to, because, turbulence, viscosity of the blood would be increased in that state. And of course, with the high blood pressure, obviously, that your blood pressure is going to always elevate if your blood viscosity is increased as well. Yeah. But in terms of the oxidation, of course, sugar and seed oils are way up there, but there also is some interesting data, and, it's epidemiologic, but it's also looking at tissue analysis, where they found a variety of environmental chemicals, some, in the class known as persistent organic pollutants, which includes things that, accumulate in the body, especially in the adipose tissue and even in the visceral fat, like PCBs and DDT, which, even though those things were taken off the market decades ago, they're still found in our tissues, in people that are even young these days. The New England Journal has a big review article, quote unquote, pollution and cardiovascular disease. And they include some ridiculous things in there related to climate agendas and things like that. But they also do quote this data. And there has been some studies of some of these molecules being found in plaques associated with cerebrovascular disease. There's with aortic valve disease, there's some evidence, although it's a bit controversial, of finding microplastics, and those can absorb lots of other environmental toxins. So what do you think that those types of pollutants and toxins play a role in this as well?
Yeah, I absolutely think that those kind of parallel pathways to the etiological development of the atherosclerosis are absolutely valid and can be argued for. Yes. My feeling, without being able to tap any specific data, my feeling is that while those things absolutely can be at play and can contribute, maybe they can be causal. I still think that the most common presentation is the person with chronic hypertension to some degree, probably someone with an adiposity problem, because that will further, exacerbate the hypertension issue, compromised kidney function due to the chronically elevated insulin in terms of the hypernatremia thing, okay, if it happens most commonly, and you're quite right, in my experience, it does happen at a set time of day. And I think it's interesting that you've linked in the dehydration there. Well, that's hemoconcentration, that's hypernatremia in and of itself. That's going to cause the blood pressure to be increased. That's going to increase the turbulence, which will both contribute to the development of lesions. And if you've got unstable lesions and you raise the pressure and raise the turbulence around those lesions, it's more likely that you're going to get a rupture and an MI at that time. That's my feeling on it. Without being able to tap data, that's my feeling.
You hit the threshold. So it sounds like we're talking about that there are these sort of mechanical forces that set up the thing, and when those are elevated in these circumstances we're talking about, then you're more likely to have the rupture. Mm-hmm. And then perhaps there's the chemical factors that contribute to the oxidation as well, which, we named a couple of different potential sources, and I didn't even mention heavy metals, but there's some implication there as well, right?
Yeah.
And maybe this is not a heterogeneous example, right? Maybe all these different chemicals have the oxidation potentials in, different magnitudes. And depending on your exposure differential to those, right, you can basically go above the threshold there and then go above the threshold with the mechanical forces. And then there's your recipe for an event.
Yep, I think so.
How would you design a experiment to confirm this kind of hypothesis?
There is existing data already on the shear rate of blood around these regions where the scleroses occur, and they have identified. Yeah, so it's the shear rate. It's the rate at which
shear rate. Okay,
so
it's like the shearing force.
Yes. So when you have turbulence, the rate at which the blood passes that region is slower. The blood's transit is delayed by this turbulent action. In laminar flow, it just goes straight past, no problem. That's why you don't get atherosclerosis except where you have this eddying, this turbulence of the blood, so that you've got an amount of blood, including the red cells, etc., and other formed elements that are kind of the transit time across where the lesion is longer. So that kind of supports the turbulence thing. To see the turbulence in action, you're going to need some kind of scanning technology to do that, I think. And whether you're going to take a reductionist approach and look at a particular region specifically, or whether you're going to try and look at the whole patterning, would make it vastly more complex to do as well, and more expensive, and etc. Is it worth doing?
We should spare no expense, because we're trying to find the real answer here, right?
Well, I think so too, but if there's nothing to sell people at the end of the day, no drug that's going to fix this, how do we get money from somewhere to do this research to prove absolutely that the drug is useless?
Well, that's really one of the main crises of the current state of science, is that there has to be a commercial interest, and often the commercial interest is not in the consumer's best interest.
Correct.
So I think if we look at the previous model before government-sponsored grants and such, where, universities used to pay professors to teach and do research. They had their endowment from tuition and from alumni donations, and perhaps, the community who might benefit from their contribution to the local economy. The reason why I did, publish some studies, but I basically volunteered part of my time because I couldn't generate any revenue from doing that research. And it was in the jails, actually. It was related to forensic legal issues. But I wanted to be a scientist career-wise. I actually had a sponsor, a senior faculty member, who was going to sponsor me for what they call a K award. And that's like for a young professor to get, a major grant that could fund their full-time salary and a full lab and experiments. And I was so excited about this, and I had many passionate research ideas. And I realized that I had absolutely no say in what I could research. I had to go look at the government website and find out what they wanted to research. And so I was like, that seems like it's for suckers in a sense, because I don't want to, be doing the government's bidding. I want to, contribute to something, but also have satisfaction out of it. And I think that this system of it being dictated, it takes away the inspiration. It takes away the sort of beneficence. I think most people that are in health science research, right? What do they want to do? Like, what's their real dream is to make a major contribution to the health of the population. And you can't really do that in this commercialized. I mean, of course, you always have to take home some money and, feed your family and pay the bills. But I don't think people become scientists to make it rich, because if they do that, then they're quite foolish.
Mm-hmm. They are indeed. Having been foolish myself for more than 2 decades as an academic, I can tell you that there absolutely is a limit to what any institution will pay a professor. And sure, that's affected by your ability to draw research funding in, among other aspects and factors that they will look at, but there is a limit. And
well, the few faculty who really get paid big money, they do consulting jobs on the side for industry.
That's right.
So they have to have research material that is commercially applicable to garner any interest from those companies to hire them.
That's right. Yeah. Like, for example, I was involved a few years back in a $12 million project as one of the primary investigators in such a project, whereby, there was a lot of industry money there. Obviously, 12 million was what came into the institution. That had no effect whatsoever on my salary. People think, oh, you got $1 million in funding. That doesn't mean I got paid $1 million or whatever, or 12 million, or, no, I still just got my salary.
And then what's the overhead for the university on that grant?
Well, yeah, they will obviously take some of that money to pay said salary, which doesn't change, funnily enough. And then obviously,
well, but don't they take the money for you to rent the lab space, the facilities fees, the insurance, right?
All of that, yes, absolutely. But they still make a handy profit on $12 million. Let's not beat around the bush.
I think they make a killing on it, the university.
Yeah. Of course, as soon as you get into that, if you then turn around and say something that's subversive, you could lose that funding. There is always someone looking over your shoulder telling you what to think and what to say. In my case, I still have such. Well, he was here. I don't know where he's gone. Ted is often not seen at the camouflage training, but he's around somewhere. And he's always telling me what to think and what to say. I'm trying to tell him to, settle down a bit, because he's on that other platform, the one formerly known as Twitter, that one.
Yes.
Disgraceful behavior from Ted over there. It really is quite shocking.
My gosh. So Ted's like your handler?
Well, or worse.
Or is he your PR manager?
It seems I'm his bitch.
I see.
Basically, is what it is. He can't be told. There you go.
Well, that simplifies life for you, right?
Well, it does a bit, as is not being employed by anybody anymore except myself. That really does simplify things quite a bit as well. Except for Ted, of course. I work for Ted. And I can share the happy news with folks that being an influencer in my own right and not working in academia anymore is actually vastly more lucrative than any level I ever achieved financially in academia. But not because YouTube pays me well. They don't. No. Yeah.
Well, look, there's being an entrepreneur, and that doesn't mean you have to start a Fortune 500 company or invent some new kind of circuit board, but it means, working for yourself. And that, if you go back in the United States specifically, for example, that was the main model that men did. And especially doctors. But now they're all employees, which means they're beholden to all the forces that you mentioned. And even if the money is not as good, the freedom makes it so much better. Yeah. But there's many opportunities out there. And you're right. It's like I got paid by YouTube for 2 months before they demonetized me. But there's other valuable services.
Yeah, absolutely.
And products.
Yeah,
that could be described. I wanted to ask you, Bart, have you heard about the helical heart at all?
I have heard the overriding sort of idea, the model. There are those who are saying the heart is not a pump. There are those who are saying, this is an electromagnetic thing and, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of read over it, and it's obviously completely at odds with everything I was taught about cardiovascular pathophysiology and all of that. And as such, I kind of went, I'll look at that at some point. And I've heard it referred to 3 or 4 times, variously by different folks. And it's something that I've yet to really look carefully into. I do understand a lot about physics. I do understand electromagnetism and particle theory and all of that quite well. But I've heard what you're talking about referred to by yourself. I've heard it referred to by Jack Kruse. Okay. And I've heard it referred to by Dr. Sarah Pugh as well.
Well, I think
you tell me about it.
Well, the state of the knowledge has advanced a little maybe since you heard about it. I think it's quite compelling. And, there are other areas, right? Like, for example, the lymphatics going into the brain, right? That for centuries was said not to occur. And then suddenly now we know that it does. So, it could be one of those kind of moments, but there's a group in Barcelona. I know Dr. Manel Ballester, but it was actually his mentor who I think originally learned this. And now there's a group at UCLA and the University of Alabama looking into this and doing some research. And so essentially what happened is that they looked at the anatomy of the heart in a different way just based on observation of cleavage planes and found out that you can actually just bluntly dissect the heart and unroll it into a single band of muscle. And that wraps up in such a way they can wrap it back up into the heart, and that the conduction or the muscle contraction actually occurs like a wave across the whole band. And they've done electrophysiology studies actually to confirm this, and that essentially, and they've looked also at the conduction system like the SA node and the AV node and found that there were some errors in the previous understanding. And then the last bit is that they actually have developed some surgical procedures for heart failure patients where they say the heart basically changes the structure into more of a ballooned out shape. And what they do is they reshape it into the sort of helical kind of cone shape. And have had some very good preliminary results. So I think, it has the potential to really change our understanding of things quite a bit. It doesn't necessarily affect what we were talking about with heart attacks per se, but, I think it illustrates a good point is that, what we think of the current state of knowledge is, even about some of the basic underlying science like anatomy, may still have some errors that we could, learn more about. And I think if you combine that with the knowledge about easy water or fourth phase water, which is, is another topic that that has some very rigorous physical scientific experiments behind it, we can start to rethink, some of the main things. Even energy metabolism, I don't think it doesn't work right the way that we think it does, where all the energy comes from the ATP and such. And, it's beyond our time limit to talk about those subjects, but perhaps in the future, we could explore that a little bit, because I think, especially with water, disruption of those properties of water is definitely implicated in not only some disease, most likely, but definitely in the way some pharmaceuticals work. Even local anesthetics has been shown experimentally to affect the water properties.
Absolutely. Well, look, those are definitely discussions that I would be very keen to have with you in future. I'd like to have you back. Perhaps also, if you'd like to host me over on your social media, that would be good too, because cross-pollination, I think, is a good thing. We won't agree on everything.
I'm sure my audience would appreciate this type of a discussion.
Good. Yeah, and as I say, perhaps on other platforms where it's safer to say things about things as well, we could do that.
Yeah, that would be excellent. I would love to get into that discussion with you.
Awesome. You're a gentleman and a scholar, Andy. Thank you very much for your valuable time. Thank you for sharing your insights into this area, and I hope that clarifies any questions you had about my video regarding heart disease and how I'm looking at it. And yeah, I look forward very much in the future to more. Just remind folks about your social media. Where would they find you if they were looking for you, if they don't already know?
Yeah, well, my website, andrewkaufmanmd.com, is the best place to find out about everything, but I'm on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Rumble, Odyssey, so under Dr. Andrew Kaufman on all those platforms.
Awesome. Very good. And we'll link all of those things under the video in the show notes so that you don't even have to type them out. Thank you very much once again. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, I really enjoyed it.
Me too.